Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com NBA Insider, writes that in the Insider section. You can head to ESPN.com and check out the full piece. We'll touch on it now. There is some breaking news concerning Fultz. He will continue to see specialists, or after seeing specialists, I will say, he will continue some rehab. He has been diagnosed with neurogenic thoracic outlet syndrome. It is a nerve problem that affects nerves between the neck and shoulder, resulting in kind of an abnormal functional movement and range of motion. So obviously it seems like there's something here, Kevin. And I wonder if this helps, hurts. Does it give us any more information that makes us feel better to make some sort of opinion on Fultz in his future?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll see how he responds to this rehab period and when he's able to get back out on the court. But it does potentially provide an explanation, and it's something that is much more common in sports. Certainly see it often with pitchers in baseball than the scapular muscle imbalance with which he was diagnosed last year.
So does this, I mean, if I say, hey, he's got this thoracic outlet syndrome as opposed to what was diagnosed before, does this make you feel like, okay, that explains more? Because you saw this kid at Washington, and I'm sure you're scratching your head thinking, what the heck is going on with this guy? Does this help or hurt or do nothing?
Yeah, I mean, potentially it could be an explanation for why it's been painful for him to shoot the basketball. It's a discussion of something that affects people when they lift their arms over their head. Is obviously a baseball pitcher would be involved in their windup quite often, and I mean the crux of the piece I wrote the other day is, he's going to have to be able to be an effective shooter, not necessarily a three-point shooter, but at least, away from the basket area, which he hasn't been this season, to be effective in the NBA. And if clearing this up enables him to do it, then, yeah, I think it has the potential to be very good news.
Okay, let's look at a couple of points here. Let's say Fultz comes back and he just is not a great shooter. He was a 41% shooter from three-point range. He shot 126 threes. It's not like this guy didn't want to shoot threes in college. He shot, and he shot often. Can he be effective in the NBA if he's not going to be pulling up from three?
It's going to be hard. I mean, one thing that we've seen in the league in the last few years here is the growing importance of the pull-up three-pointer to pick-and-roll play. Forces defenders to go over the screen, meet the point guard there instead of just going under and meeting them on the other side of it, and that opens up the drive. That opens up the screen setter rolling to the basket for an easy score, and just creates a lot of problems for defenses. So it's become much more difficult to become an elite point guard in this league without having the ability to shoot the pull-up three. Now, you can still be a decent, maybe even a starting point guard. Elfrid Payton would be an example of someone who, has started in the league despite not being a particularly good shooter. Rajon Rondo, the occasional catch and shoot three, but he's not really a threat off the dribble. So you can make that happen at a certain level, but those guys also, have been more effective mid-range shooters than we've seen Fultz be so far. And that's one of the things that stood out in the research is even though he looks a lot more comfortable shooting that pull-up jumper than he does shooting the three, they haven't necessarily gone in very well either.
So Mike asked you how you think that this helps or hurts or does neither for the situation, but how do you anticipate the Sixers to deal with this news now? Like, do they feel better about themselves by backing him this entire time, and now are they just going to say, okay, great, we found the root of the problem, and we're just going to let him get through this and see what happens? Or do you think they're still figuring out, should we trade him? What should we do the rest of the way? Are we going to play him? Like, how do you anticipate them to handle this news?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably pushes the pause button on any thoughts of trading him, because you want to see how he does react, because they drafted him number one for a reason, and while that fit might not be quite as good as it was when he was drafted because of the addition of Jimmy Butler and because of the way that Ben Simmons has taken over is a purer point guard than maybe we even realized at the time Fultz was drafted he was going to be. Nonetheless, he's an incredibly talented player, someone who brings a pick and roll dimension that they don't get from Simmons, and Butler provides some of, but not maybe at the level that a fully realized Markelle Fultz could be. So, I think you want to give him every opportunity to make this work, and they'll kind of see what he looks like when he's able to return, and hopefully that's well in advance of the trade deadline, so they do have some time to evaluate him before having to make a decision about him this season.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because if he's, as you mentioned, if he's not effective without the jumper, how does he kind of fit into this current roster with Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, and Jimmy Butler and J.J. Redick kind of as the four guys? Where does he fit into the big picture?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think there are places where if he's just kind of that kind of non-shooting pick and roll point guard, but at least has, the in-between game that can make him reasonably efficient, there are places he can be effective doing that. But Philly probably, because the composition of the rest of the roster is not one of those. He's going to have to be playing off the ball a lot if he's going to play with Simmons and with Jimmy Butler and even with Joel Embiid, given how much he's handling the ball in the post. And, that's going to require the catch and shoot ability.
Last week on the Russillo podcast, and you mentioned this in your story, Woj said that the Sixers probably could not get a first-round pick. So, Kevin, if you're a GM or you're talking to GM, if you're in the front office of the Sixers, are you saying if we're not going to get what we want, it's better for us to kind of hold on to this now that you know this information and just hope? Or is it at the point where you'd say, I think we should just cut our losses and get whatever we can?
So I don't think his value is going to decrease between now and the trade deadline. That would take a pretty extreme event because he wasn't playing that well right now. I mean, obviously, the more additional time goes on, the less value there is in the potential he showed at Washington and, before that as an amateur. And that's why I think that, if you wait till the end of this season, till next summer, that his value might even potentially decrease from where it is right now. But I don't think that's probably going to happen over the next couple months leading up to the trade deadline. And, given that there is a chance of it improving if he plays well when he comes back, I don't think there's any urgency to make a move right now.
How does his salary come into play here?
Yeah, I think it's a big factor for the Sixers, given this summer is going to be their last real opportunity to use cap space before extending Ben Simmons and hopefully re-signing Jimmy Butler to a hefty contract. The combination of those two is going to push them way over the cap in future years and potentially even into the luxury tax. So every dollar counts this summer, especially with only 6 players under contract, assuming Butler opts out, declines his player option, becomes a free agent. So even if it's not necessarily to sign a max guy now that you've got Butler on the roster, you're still going to want to be able to take advantage of that money in free agency to add depth, fill out the roster. And Fultz, because of the size of his salary, is the number 1 pick, he actually becomes pretty expensive the next 2 seasons. So, I think that's, a factor that could drive the Sixers to have to make a decision on him now to potentially maximize their cap space this summer.
Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com with us here. Kevin, what are some of the things that you saw from him in the NBA this season that he did well, that was encouraging, that if he can get, add more to it? Like, some people just look at him and say, he was ineffective. He didn't belong out there. Did you look at a guy and say, well, I mean, in the 25 minutes per game, he did X, Y, and Z pretty good, or was he just a liability?
I mean, I think what I'd say is actually in some ways, the rest of his game besides shooting was more encouraging during his rookie season. He was highlighted by that triple-double in the final night of the season, making him the youngest player ever to get a triple-double. His assist rate was much better last year. And, one thing I kind of found looking through the data is it looks like potentially teams decided this year, when Fultz drives to the basket, we're going to stay home on shooters, not let him drive and dish and force him to finish at the basket. And as a result, he's been more effective as a scorer off the drive, but not nearly as effective as a playmaker.
Kevin Pelton. So, I know you saw him play a lot at Washington, and I have said it's hard to make a fair decision or overview of this guy because the player he was at Washington is not the same player that we're watching right now. Would you agree with that?
100%. It's a completely different player in terms of the confidence with which he plays, the freedom with which he played at UW. You can see him thinking on the court now. Can I take this shot? Do I have to take this 3 because of the fact that I'm so wide open? And that wasn't, there wasn't that degree of hesitation whatsoever.
He shot without conscience there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make him sound like a ball hog here because he wasn't that. He was an efficient scorer, and he wasn't playing a huge role even relative to the fact that at that point, there wasn't a ton of other offensive talent on the UW roster besides him. But he was playing like you would expect a number 1 pick to play.
Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com, and check out his long piece. It's very good, well thought out. What should the Sixers do with Markelle Fultz? It comes before the news today that he has some sort of nerve problem, so we'll see how that affects his future in Philadelphia. Kevin, always appreciate the time, pal.
All right, thanks as always for having me.